Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As most of us start approaching midlife, we begin to find that inner part of ourselves that yearn for a lot more. After all, think about almost a half a century of kind of guessing about where we want to be, where we want to go, and most importantly, what we really want in our lives. As we begin to reflect on these things, we realize, we've pretty much been kind of living by not only everybody else's rules, but in the ways that everybody thought that we should be living without really trusting our inner guidance. On the Beyond 50 radio program today is a special guest we've had on our program once before, who's come from being a teen runaway to an award-winning producer. Certainly her journey is an interesting one as she shares her story along with many others in her book, The Power of Peace in You. It's a revolutionary tool for hope, healing, and happiness. She has also instituted a worldwide wonderful course which helps people in what is known as the Stillness method. That's right, how we can start being still and learning to trust in the inner voice and guide that we all have within us. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Miss Marlise Karlin. Marlise, thank you for joining us on the program again.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you and with everyone.
Now, how have things been since the last time we spoke? I know that you had visited in Portland, Oregon, where I had the opportunity to meet with you and enjoy your stillness session there and be able to connect with you there. Very interesting stuff. But what's been going on since then?
Well, as I've been traveling around on this book tour, what I get to witness is what's really miraculous. And, this is not in the realm of woo-woo. Although when we see things that are miraculous, it tends to make us stop and go, oh, my gosh, is that really possible? Because, as you know, I stop in a place, I get to meet with people, I offer the Simplicity of Stillness method. We all have an opportunity to hear more about it and what it can bring our lives. And then we have some time spent in a stillness session. Well, I did this in one location at a healing arts fair, and the next time I returned, which was 4 days later, one woman shared how much of her life had already transformed just from that time, that brief time in the stillness, and that she had been drinking, she said, a huge bottle of wine every single night for 1.5 years straight because she had felt so stressed, but it had turned into, obviously, a habit and one that she wasn't able to let go of. And that night when she returned home, there was nothing inside her that could even have a drink. And it had continued that way. And
wow.
So she said no shakes, nothing. Here she was, feeling, and she was like lit up like a light bulb. So happy about all these things because not only was the drinking, as if that's not miraculous enough, but she was someone who wasn't very self-expressed, and she found herself really communicating to people where she felt that were not treating her well. And so she was already talking and sharing so much. Her friend turned to her and said, I thought you were the one who was not self-expressed. And there were many other stories like this just over the last month, just from people having that brief time to expand that level of infinite intelligence that exists within. Because isn't that what's going to guide you to having these miraculous events in your life where you're just becoming more of you?
Mm-hmm. This is one of them realms. You mentioned woo-woo earlier, and one of the thoughts that had occurred to me as you had said that is that you think of all the guides and spiritual teachers, gurus, whatever you want to label these people as, and you think, here's some people that seem to have it together. They know something that I don't. And just like going to your neighborhood community church, you pretty much surrender this personal power over to the person on the pulpit, the leader, the person that, again, has this knowing that apparently you don't. And there are a ton of cases, lots and lots of them throughout the history of mankind, especially when it comes to organized religion, that this becomes a very dangerous realm for a person to do where they do surrender this part of themselves over. Now, what would you say to people who are listening at this point? Obviously you're helping people to awaken and realize, look, you're more powerful than you not only imagine, but that you really give yourself credit for. What would you say to something like that?
What I would tell you, and what I will tell you right now, is you have a guidance system that is extraordinary, but we're not used to hearing it so clearly that we actually move on the actions we're inspired to take from this guidance system. And we also haven't had an ability to tap in to this level of awareness as we can today. And so as you begin to tap into this awareness, what you notice is it's your inner teacher that's guiding you. And isn't that great? And then you get to see evidence of it in your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that evidence that allows you to trust and know that you can guide yourself on this amazing journey of life. And you will, go to different teachers to hear different information and to access different knowledge. But what is being offered here is so experiential, because as you experience this universal life force energy that exists within you, and it moves you into higher understanding, then you are listening to the guidance from within you.
Now, again, that's very powerful stuff, and people sometimes, this is almost a regular road less traveled for a lot of people. And you actually talk about in your book, when it comes to changing the way that you have lived, you just know that the way you've done things has left you feeling unsatisfied, unfulfilled, that there is this yearning for change. And someone says, well, change what you're doing, So that means that you're stepping on a different path, one step at a time. But as you do that, as you talk about in your book, The Power of Peace in You, is that pretty soon you kind of see that resistance, or things don't seem to go so well, and there's that urge, that tug that says, things really weren't so bad on that other road. What do you say we go back there? It really wasn't so, we've been for years, and it was kind of fun, don't you think? And I mean, this is kind of ridiculous. Explain what's really going on there from your experience.
Well, I believe that, change is very frightening to most people. So, I know people, and I'm sure you do too, who would rather keep the status quo, even if it's addictive, abusive, unfulfilling, because you know it. You know the bad points, but, the unknown seems even more frightening. But what you find is when you begin connecting to this universal power that exists within you on higher levels, you begin experiencing so much courage and strength within yourself. And you begin getting the inspiration of what to do that will transform your life, that change doesn't look the way it did before. It just becomes the natural evolution of how you express yourself through your actions and through what you speak. And then, of course, life circumstances will show up because your behavior has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So you're diving into, let's say, new beginnings purely by who you're being. And it's happened so naturally, you haven't had to have that moment of, I'm going to do this big life change, because that always feels too scary,
Right. I know 30 days seems to be a long time for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, there was something. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to share, it's a story in the book about a young woman who I met. She was a hairdresser and a hairstylist, and she had contracted some horrific illness that the doctors told her she would have for her entire life. and that there was no way it was going to go away. She just had to take medication, and she had to go to the hospital once every week to just eliminate the fluids that would build up in her body. And so, she was in a lot of pain. So this is not a great diagnosis for your life when you're 26 years old, is it?
No, not at all.
Yeah, and so when I noticed it, and I suggested to her that she come and do one of my programs, and she said very simply, well, I don't believe in anything like that.
Ah. Nothing like saying, I don't believe or I believe in something.
Yeah, and I said, I got it. And I waited, and a week later I came back, and I could see she gained even more weight. So she was obviously in more pain, and switching from one foot to the next while she was working. And I said, I'm going to invite you again. What's the worst thing that could happen? You lose an hour out of your life, an hour and a half. So she came, and then when I saw her after that, I said, did anything change? And she thought about it, and she goes, well, it was very peaceful, but what I'll tell you is I found a talk radio the next day that was funny, and I laughed all the way to work. And I usually have road rage, and I'm screaming out of my car. So, yeah, that works. So does it make sense? No. But is that some beginning synchronicity that you're drawing to you? Very possible. And then suddenly, within a couple of weeks, she suddenly realized she was surrounded by angry people at her work. And she decided to go and find another place to work where she was surrounded by happier people. And then suddenly she got an eviction notice from her apartment. And by then she was already accepting that life was filled with change, and this was probably going to be better for her because she could find a place that was more filled with light. And then suddenly she realized that the guy she was living with really wasn't supporting her in her life. And so little by little, she was going through all these natural changes, nothing radical. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
But it happened so simply. And as she was doing these practices and incorporating this time of stillness into her life, suddenly she started changing her diet, and she didn't eat quite as many fried foods. And suddenly she didn't stay out that late at night, and she would have 2 drinks instead of 5, and on and on. And within a year's time, she had even begun dropping down the medication she was on because she could read her body. She knew now when she would get out of balance, and she would take more time to rest. She had that inner knowing. And, at the end of the year, she went to the doctors and had them test her, and they said, you're always going to have this disease. You just might as well get used to it. And after they ran the test, they said, well, we might have made a mistake. Because we can't even find, we misdiagnosed you. We can't find even a trace of it in your body.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what's possible. And look, she began from a place of, I don't believe that. And then very naturally, so what I'm saying is it's so simple. This methodology is so simple. It's almost like a philosophy of life. And then you just get to add in this new form of meditation by simply taking a walk and listening to the music, by playing it in the morning before you get up and going. There's just different ways to add it in your life and allow your life to teach you.
What I find really cute about the story you just shared in the very beginning is that you said, why don't you just come back and do another hour? All it would be is an hour out of your life. And the neatest little thought occurred to me that I thought I'd share with the listeners is this. Go ahead and try this, because the side effect is possibility. Would that be okay with you?
I love that. Yeah. A big doorway called possibility.
I mean, what do you have now?
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Now, talk about how or what led you to create what is known as a stillness session, and kind of give us an idea what that is. Well,
when I had these experiences of that gave me a new perception of life, and I had been meditating for over 20 years. I had studied science, evolutionary thought, leadership, the laws of attraction. I had, gathered all of this knowledge and synthesized it into practices. And then I began having these experiences because I had an injury. And it reminded me to get back on my journey of wanting to know how to let go of the suffering that I had in my life because of, leaving home at an early age, not feeling loved, abusive situation with alcoholic father. But where's that freedom? I know we can experience this level of freedom. We don't have to live with this, depression and unhappiness all the time. And as I had that knowing, after I had that reminder to get back, from the change that was happening in my life with this illness that was telling me that, I was having a hard time walking. Well, that's a wake-up call. So what I got is messages now to develop a methodology that would be so simple a child could do it. And retaining what's so profound from what I experienced, so that people who've been on a long-time soul-searching journey of 30 and 40 years could also experience a greater level of clarity. And what came through to me is I was guided to find music. I would suddenly be inspired to different words I would speak. And then the most magical ingredient of all is that what this stillness session is infused with is that igniting power of peace. And that is that universal life force energy that literally is transmitted through the words, the music. And that's what you recognize because it exists inside you. So all you're doing literally is, can you say to someone, you want to listen to a little music with me? You're not saying, hey, you ready to transform your whole screwed-up life? You don't even have to go there. You just say, hey, let's just listen to some music together. I think it's really calming.
There you go. Or you just put it on and say, why don't you just have a glass of water with me and let's just talk for a moment and just sit there and just stay quiet for a bit. Yeah, fascinating stuff. Now, how long does it usually take before people begin to experience this stillness that you're talking about? Because I know that you feature in your book a small stillness session CD that they can kind of get a jump start with. But when do they start immediately, feeling these things?
Every one of us has a different journey to accessing that innate teacher within. And for some people, I would say 99% of people who listen to a stillness session, even literally in 5 minutes time, experience a sense of relaxation and peace. And then there's another, percentage of people who go so deep that suddenly they experience not even being a part of their body because they're dropping into such a deep place. And that usually happens through usually an 11-minute or an 18-minute, 20-minute stillness session. There are other people who already get messages from people who passed on. There are other people who begin to experience light coming in. So there's a huge variety of things that happen. And I've also had people experience pain. Now, that's a much smaller group of people, but sometimes that pain has been a reminder of something they didn't let go of, something from their youth, whether it was anger or an emotion or whatever. But then they have that instant awareness, and all of a sudden, in the days to come, it bubbles up what it is that they didn't let go of, one of those habits that they still are hanging on to. But majority of people within a very short amount of time really just experience this sense of peace.
It's very exciting to consider the fact that as people begin this journey with the stillness session, as you're talking about, you say that habits begin to arise where they see them differently than they did before, ways of being. And you begin to realize these habits were only in place to support perhaps beliefs and a way of living and thinking that you had before that no longer serve you. And I can see where once a person becomes still, becomes quiet, begins trusting in that inner sense, that voice, that serendipity, begins to happen a lot more often. What does that look like?
I will tell you the cutest story. One day, I'm in the car with my niece. At the time, she was 16 years old. And, of course, I'm speaking to her and, about the work and, offering her my insights just as a daily way of that's who I am, And one day we're traveling along, and we were supposed to get someplace at a certain time, and it was exactly when there was a lot of traffic. And all of a sudden, the way just opened up. And Morgan looked at me and she said, Aunt Marlise, you don't have to convince anybody of anything. She said, it's how you live your life. Don't think I don't notice how traffic moves out of the way. Don't think I don't notice how parking spots appear. Don't think I don't notice how people phone you when you're needing to find out something. That's synchronicity of life.
I'm surprised she didn't go further, Marlise, and just simply say, Moses has nothing on you.
Well, this is what we all have.
Right.
So she started finding it in her own life, too. But remember that sometimes that awareness has a moment of almost being painful, because you brought this up. You said, you get aware of something that you've been doing and you've been repeating over and over. And then, for me, it was like, wow. When I experienced the profound love that opened in my own heart, I just began weeping. Like, I can't believe I've kept this away from myself.
Mm-hmm.
How have I spent so many years of my life and not experienced this? And what I'm speaking of didn't come from another human being. So it didn't come from, I have to go and find, a love out there. It stemmed from inside me, from my own heart. And isn't that really what's extraordinary? Because when we experience that love, look what we have to give. And then when we go and find a relationship in our lives, we're not finding it to complete us. We're finding it because we have something to offer someone, and we know they have something to offer us. And together we can do this extraordinary life's journey and keep expanding each other's lives in that way.
What seemed to be happening, it was just something that had occurred to me, this was just a few weeks ago. There is a new documentary that is just beginning to air, which is Decoding Deepak, and it's about Deepak Chopra. Mm-hmm. I know many of our listeners, and I know that you're familiar with Deepak Chopra. There's no doubt about that. Mm-hmm. Now, this guy has impacted millions of lives from around the world, and one day his son, his very own son, says, Dad, I'm going to follow you around for a year, and I'm just going to film who you are. And I'm going to do this in a very objective, non-biased way. And what you get, obviously, in this film is somebody who is very human. And what had occurred to me, even as we talk with you, and I've met with you, and I've met many people, including Deepak Chopra, is that you realize these were what you could consider to be, just like yourself, ordinary people who found something profoundly extraordinary that was within sight of them and couldn't help but let that spill out to share with other people so that they could, too, experience their extraordinariness, their own light. And it's exciting because, as I was talking about earlier in the program, there's a time that we just simply surrendered the power, hence blind faith. That when you begin to awaken, as you were talking about there, and we realize this whole time, sort of like Dorothy and the slippers, and you've always been home, so the fairy godmother says, it's always been right there inside of you, that we become so discouraged for a time, even depressed, I would think, to realize all of that wasted time that could have been put to great use to where we are now could have been much greater than it is. And you talk about the power of forgiveness in those moments. Share how powerful something like that really is.
Well, I love how you laid it out in that way, because it really is about everybody finding their extraordinariness.
Be like F. Lee Buckley. I'll just make up words as I go along, and pretty soon they're in the dictionary, So.
That's a good one. I like it. And from someone who came from feeling so not that, to where you'll read in the book, I literally painted my room black when I was 16, because that's how I felt. Everything around me felt that black and that dark. And then as I began through life's journey, and as I had this profound experience of this energy that is so alchemical, that is filled with such peace, that I recognized who we are, and beyond even what I understood after all those years of meditation, and that it filled me with that knowing, so that I didn't have to live in that doubt and distrust anymore. That's when we can begin to live on higher levels of consciousness and be offering it out, not from a place of ego, because everyone has this, but what it does is it says, okay, you don't have to have this, you're not enough, you're this, you're that, all those years of your brain feeding you, and people beyond, who surrounded you. And with that, I'll say my father. My father said words to me I would never repeat to another human being, ever. And those words absolutely, impacted me for years and years and years. And then when I experienced that profound love that existed in my heart, and I realized my father might never know it. It was so easy to forgive him. How can you be angry at someone who doesn't have that knowing of who they are? Then everything they do is coming from this place of unconsciousness, isn't it?
Right.
At least everything they do that is hurtful and mean. Do you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying he was an overall hurtful, mean human being. He wasn't. Many people loved him. Many people adored him. It seemed that most of his unconsciousness got spewed all over me. and my mother and, my brothers and sisters. But, when I actually got to have a time where I spent with him, because I recognized, all of my own frailties. So who am I to judge him? And I could be with him and be with him and appreciate the man that existed there beyond the disease of alcoholism. And I saw this fragile human being who also had been beaten by his father, whose father had been alcoholic, who totally mistreated him. And I got that I could end that cycle, and that I got that I could completely forgive him. And then that really sets you free.
I can believe that. Sure is.
Yeah.
Definitely. Now, the other thing, too, that our listeners can come to understand is how they get started and how they know that they're beginning to sort of clear their way, so to speak. And I would think judgment would be one of those things that we could pay attention to quite a bit. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, there was a time I was kind of laid up for a day in bed with the flu, and so my wife hands me a couple of magazines. I think it was like Us Magazine and People Magazine, those kinds of things. And this was several years ago. And I remember sitting there flipping through these magazines, and I just felt all this anxiety coming through me. I mean, literally, I was just like, these things are driving me nuts. Till I got to the crossword puzzle, and I started doing that, and then I noticed, man, I'm starting to relax and feel okay about being in this magazine. And what was happening was that you're reading the lives of movie stars, actors, actresses, singers. You're seeing them out on the French Riviera, in yachts, look like they're having a good time. while at the same time reading about all the suffering they have, such as divorces, marriages, or they're having a bad day. And probably at that time, what I was thinking is, what right do these people have to have all this pain and suffering when they have all this financial freedom? And I could imagine that there are probably a lot of people that thought just like I did at that time. And, you know, the awareness comes that pick up something like that are going to pull these triggers so that you got a chance to do some serious clearing here. What do you recommend?
You know, one thing that I found is how much judgment takes us out of being in connection with our highest truth. And just the awareness makes us realize, I don't want to do that anymore. Now, look, it's human. It's something we've learned because we see it all around us. People do this on television night and day. You know, people do it in religious communities. People do it everywhere. And when you get that, every time you're judging someone else, how do you feel?
Mm-hmm.
Horrible. There's no space for love and connection to what you want to create in your life and who you wish to be when you're in judgment of another human being. And so what I have done for myself is, you know, one of the most magical things about this journey through the simplicity of stillness and finding that power of peace within yourself is you have a heightened awareness of when you are in judgment, of when you're not in connection. Because when you're in connection, you can feel that flow of joy and happiness and inspiration moving through you. And when you're in judgment and anger and depression and all the other things, that's that dense emotional body that just drags you down. Mm-hmm. And so it isn't that you have to get mad at yourself, but remove the things around you that make you do that. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
Maybe you don't want to read those magazines for a while. You know, maybe you want to notice when you're doing that and say, I don't want to do that. Because we don't know anybody else's pain, do we? We don't know what someone has gone through and what their life actually looks like beyond the facade of it. Mm-hmm. And maybe these people are catalysts for us to recognize where we go off track. You know, and when we get back in that space of connection, then we're focused on what we can do to bring greater benefit to our own life, to bring greater joy into our own life. One of the things that I like to do is use different words sometimes as key elements to keep me on track. And one that I would use in this instance is acceptance. Mm-hmm. What does it feel like when somebody accepts you just for who you are? It's so freeing. If you can give that gift to someone, that's an amazing gift to give, isn't it?
I would think so.
Yeah. And if we can begin giving that gift to each other. Now, does that mean we're accepting when someone's doing something horrific? Absolutely not. It isn't that we're blinded. No, we can see things very clearly. I'm talking about just acceptance of you as a human being, knowing that you have that light inside. And then here's how we can communicate about what's not working, so that I can also support you in finding something else in your life that'll put you back on a good track.
Mm-hmm. All very exciting stuff for our listeners to be able to embrace and realize that it doesn't have to be a complicated journey or process either, and you've certainly proved that through your stillness sessions. I mean, these are very simple things for people to do.
They are. And what I want you to know is, and that's what you'll track in the book, is it gives you, I call it the Power of Peace map, because it takes you from how we use the power of intention and we converge it with that deep healing energy of stillness that is so experiential. It begins guiding us from within. And then you begin moving into all these beautiful phases of releasing resistance, of connecting to your inner teacher, of recognizing a whole new methodology for creating your life with purpose and love, for how to listen to the messages and make sure it's not just some gut feeling, but it is that inspiration that comes through when you're connected to the source of who we are. So as you're guided through this whole journey, what begins to happen is, as I said, that awareness, this conscious awareness moves into a higher place in your life. And when it does, you get to see what has limited you. And when you see that, you can begin now having a choice to create new habits that support your life. And when you have new habits, what happens? You have new behavior. Mm-hmm. And when you have new behavior, you already are beginning to create new life circumstances because you're not reacting anymore, you're acting out of inspiration, and you're drawing new life circumstances to you. And when you're doing that, you're suddenly living in this new conscious life that is filled with so much more love and hope and healing. And all that you have aspired to begins to come to you very simply. And it might surprise you because it might not even be what you thought.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's the other thing, too, Marlise, is people, you get to a point where you realize your wishes get fulfilled quickly and simply, and you start thinking to yourself, well, I always thought this had to be hard. And you realize it doesn't have to be. That doesn't mean things are, super easy, everything falls into your lap, but it's easier than you think it is. Would that be a right way to say that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. There is that flow of life that begins to happen. And what I said, a cab driver, I got in. You have all these wonderful moments with people when you're on a tour like this. And it was in New York. So you got a New York cabbie. And he goes, okay, I heard about what you do. Give me the bottom line.
Cut to the chase, sister. This was one that looked like Ernest Borgnine, had the stubby cigar hanging out of his mouth.
Give me the bottom line. And I said, the bottom line is your perception of life changes. And so it isn't that every single thing that happens to you is going to be different. You could still face some of the life challenges that you face today. But if your perception of life has changed and you deal with it in a different way, then it will appear to you differently and it will be transmitted differently throughout your whole life. So imagine that. So now you get off it how much faster than you ever did before.
Mm-hmm.
You get off it, and now you're not drawing that next cycle that goes downward because you're not attaching that energy of anger and depression and all that stuff to you. Now you're like, okay. And what you're doing is bring you back to exactly what you said, Daniel. That door of possibility opens huge because you're allowing yourself now to access where this field of potential, as Deepak says, this field of potential exists. And isn't that what we want to do? We can't keep living by the status quo and think our life is going to change. We have to be able to access this higher intelligence, and that exists in this field of all potential that is sitting there waiting for us to access it. And that's what I found when I began having these experiences, is that I was tapping into that field of potential. And it's another name for it is that's what meditation has always been, isn't it? Except we've kind of put some like woo-woo things, or it has become difficult for so many people. Oh, my mind thinks all the time, and da-da-da-da-da. And everybody's got a story about meditation.
Right.
But what's great about this is, whether you've been meditating a long time or you've never meditated and you're not interested, can you listen to some music?
Can you do that?
Can you do that? And then as you do that, watch what starts to happen. Of course you want to integrate it. I'm not suggesting that it's a one-time deal, although for many people, after one time, they have had big experiences and their life began to transform. But what I suggest is we're Olympians. We already have this amazing talent and skill inside us. But now what we want to do is open up, begin to integrate it as a practice, as an Olympian would do, so we can go for the gold. And the good news is you start winning your races from day one. It isn't that you have to wait till years from now to see this transforming and bringing greater benefits of health And, I mean, health, right off the bat. Don't you want to feel better?
Right.
I mean, I go to doctors so they can tell me what great shape I'm in. That's it. That's it. And I do go. I go to doctors, but it changes your health.
Mm-hmm.
It really puts you in a whole new form of healing that's just phenomenal, and you're drawing this to you.
Even more exciting for our listeners out there to come to know as well, as we talk about the book, The Power of Peace in You. And our guest today is Marlise Karlin. When you talk about being healthy and being happy, or you're healthier and happier than you were ever before, when you begin to let go and not be attached to outcomes that create suffering, because a lot of times what will happen is we have this tremendously happy experience. Then we attach to ourselves to that experience, and we try to recreate that experience so we can relive that happiness again, and that becomes the illusion, and there comes the suffering. The same thing happens even with moments that aren't so good. We stay attached to those. It could be a wrongdoing that perhaps somebody wronged us, so we stay attached to that until we feel vindicated. In the meantime, we suffer for however many days, weeks, months, or years that may be before we feel that person or situation that has wronged us has had enough. And you get to a point where that all goes away, as you're saying. You become happy, and people say, but is it possible to be happy all the time? You say, well, probably not. The elated happiness, like a kid skipping along with cotton candy at a fair. However, what you have is contentedness. And that is a heck of a lot better than suffering and dis-ease, so to speak.
Yes, yes. And that it's very well said, Daniel, and that content.
You just bring this through me, Marlise.
It was beautiful. It was really beautiful. That content is what completely fulfills our life. That's when you're living an enriched life, when you can experience a place of contentment just looking out at the sunset, just driving along in your car on the way to pick up your child, just saying hello to someone and feeling love inside your heart for this person. So it doesn't have to only be these peak moments. The peak moments become these pearls that just show up of contentment here, 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 here. Precious moments in life with another individual. It's so beautiful to have this, and it's beautiful to be able to experience it being by yourself. Mm-hmm. Just being by yourself, not having to add anything to you, to that moment, but just being still and feeling that contentment coming through you.
And as Carlos Castaneda came to learn from Don Juan, this becomes the active side of infinity. So time is timeless. Beautiful.
And that's exactly what I was experiencing in each one of these moments. And many, many people experience doing the stillness sessions. You don't know where you are sometimes and it's not a frightening feeling. It's this spacious, timeless place that just feels good. So it's not a concept of, I need to stop my mind. No, you just land in this place that just feels so good. You just want to stay there. In fact, what many people report is, maybe you'll put on the 11-minute stillness session because you think you have no time and you've just got to have a quick tap in. And suddenly at the end of it, you come to the awareness of, no, this feels good, I'm staying. And you click the button and you do another 11 minutes because you just go, wait a minute, what's more important than this?
Well, exactly.
Feeding me. Exactly.
Now, tell us, or at least tell the listeners, how they can find out about where they can get the power of peace in you and, perhaps a website. I'm sure that you have these CDs available for people to be able to download or at least be able to get a hold of.
Yes. thepowerofpeaceinyou.com. You can even shorten it again, Power giftofpeaceinyou.com. And when you go there, you'll see all about the book. You can also hook over to my own site from there. And there's free gifts. There's an excerpt of the book, so you can begin looking at it, reading it already now. And there's an excerpt of a stillness session that you can download and begin to experience that right away. And what I invite you to know is you can go to your local Barnes & Noble. They have it there. It's also on Amazon. And it's just you want to find ways to begin including this in your life so simply. There are 11-minute stillness sessions. There's 18-minute, 22 minutes, all different. And you can read about the different stillness sessions at the store at marlisekarlin.com. And so I just invite you to continue this journey of hope, healing, and happiness in your own life and find how you can just begin it simply.
And keeping it simple as well. Isn't it always the greatest things in life always seem to be the simplest?
Exactly. Exactly. And I want you to know that the exciting thing for me is hearing from people who are now reading the book 2 and 3 times. Because what you do is you tap into the different, phases, because it takes you through that hero's journey with different stories of people, and what has happened to them when they went through such difficult life challenges and how they were able to move through them. And this is from warriors on the plains of Africa, to CEOs in Amsterdam, to 9-year-old kids who became catalysts to end bullying in their own schools. So it's every walk of life. So there's something for everyone to, connect with. And then you have, like you said, the stillness session is at the back of the book, and you just have the different practices. So anytime you're going through something difficult, you can tap in and find out how can I access more information to help me right now in my life. And there will be a practice there to guide you.
And most importantly for the listeners out there, for them to know is keep it simple. It is your act of complicating things that has made it suffering in the first place.
Yes, and, it's something that happens to all of us because we're human, and that's kind of what we came in, we came in with all the equipment to recognize who we are, but then with society and life being the way that it is, we get impacted with so many belief systems that it's hard to see beyond them until that light of recognition streams through us so powerfully that it instantly begins eliminating what has held us apart from the brilliance that we truly are.
I was thinking about a scene from a movie, The Legend of Bagger Vance. And there was a scene where Matt Damon and Will Smith are in the locker room. It's, an early period piece about golf. And a particular man from the South who's a little busted up because of what the war had done to him. And he was considered to be sort of Savannah, Georgia's hero, the one that was expected by that community to win this tournament that was put together. And so they're sitting in the locker room, and Matt Damon's character is really frustrated, and Will Smith says, let me see if I can understand what you're saying. He was playing his caddy in this movie. So what you're saying is that God comes and he gives us life, and he gives us a soul, gives that soul everything that it needs. And then all of a sudden, when things just don't go its way, it just feels this need to just throw it all away. Is that pretty much what you're saying? That's a real sad story. And it was the whole idea that when things just don't go its way, you've got everything you need, but when things just don't go your way, you just feel this need to toss it aside. Well, everybody else can have it. I guess I'm just not allowed. And obviously you're saying that's not true. Wake up, get some clarity, and let's get to where you belong. Yeah.
And the road just gets better and better and better every single day. And that's exactly what happened in The Legend of Bagger Vance, But he had to have that moment of depression and not feeling clear and feeling the challenges of life that would bring to him a new understanding and then a way to access it. And so, it has such a beautiful, that's exactly what happens to each one of us. As we know, we know we're powerful, but you got to get into the experience of it. And I had no idea of the courage I had inside myself. And I still amaze myself.
Mm-hmm.
When I go, God, I never did any of that. I was the most frightened human being you'll ever meet.
Mm-hmm.
And the things I do today, I'm like, oh my gosh, how is that possible?
I can't remember who actually says this quote. I'm going to guess it's Ralph Waldo Emerson, but I read this earlier this year, and you think of the possibility of this quote, and it's pretty fascinating, actually, and it simply says, if we lived our lives to our fullest potential, we would simply astound ourselves. And if you meditated on that daily, just imagine where something like that would take you if you just tried. And, you incorporate a stillness session several times a day and you meditate on something like that, wow, the journey would be amazing, just like what you're talking about.
Right. And I think that this is exactly what's happening for everyone now, because there is such huge change in the world
mm-hmm.
and in people's lives. We're experiencing those structures we believed in falling apart. We're seeing how the economy and politics and everything that's happening is so profoundly affecting our lives. And it is guiding many people to really check back in and find that inner life, because it's your inner life that's going to feed and create your outer life. And if you're only focused on the outer life, you are very susceptible to having more pain, more depression, more unhappiness, and believing that nothing can change.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, that change is already happening. Look how many people are waking up today. Look how many beautiful things are happening if you look around you.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as we each accept responsibility for making that change in our own lives, think what a difference it'll make in the life of our communities, in the life of our families, in the life of the world at large. Because each of us will tap into what our purpose is and how we can make that difference in the greater world, not only in our own lives. And that means just from even who you're being, not like you have to run out and create world peace tomorrow, and that could happen. But, it's just about who you're being. Because as you begin, look, if you're with a happy person, how do you feel? Mm-hmm. If you're with a person who's joyous and passionate, how do you feel? So imagine more people resonating on higher levels of consciousness that align with acceptance, freedom, joy. That already sets up a greater state of being where we have access to the solutions that can create the world we're all wishing to live in, the world we're all intending to live in. But if we, keep buying into nothing will ever work and my life is a mess and all that sort of stuff, that's what will surround you until you finally reach that place where you just can't take it anymore. Then just go and grab that book called The Power of Peace in You.
Have some stillness sessions and take it easy. It's not as hard as you think.
Exactly. Open up to whatever page speaks to you, because that's what will happen.
Fascinating stuff. The Power of Peace in You is the book. You can find that at powerofpeaceinyou.com is the website, and also experience the stillness sessions, which are available there as well. Marlise, again, a wonderful pleasure to have you program. Hopefully we'll be able to have you back again should you decide you want to accept our invitation.
Oh, always, always, always. I so appreciate it, and I appreciate your audience and everyone out there. And you, Daniel, just spending time in the company of beautiful people who are really moving into the awareness of who we are consistently, is such a great experience for me, and I know for all of you, and that's why you're here listening, because you're finding that happening right here on the air. So thank you for everything that you do and what you're bringing out into the world.
Thank you again, Marlise. What a pleasure. Again, the book is The Power of Peace in You. Our guest today, Marlise Karlin. Again, find out more about that at powerofpeaceinyou.com is the website. We'll also have a hot link there on our Beyond 50 blog spot, easy to find right there as well. So that way you don't have any excuse not to be still. We need y'all to be still so you can come to that personal power that you have, become that light and light up the world around you to help others to do the same. Thank you again for tuning in and joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.